Final Fantasy 16 was going to be my game of the year. A game that did dang near everything perfectly. Combat that I felt was very fun, multi-dimensional, and customizable. Side quests that fleshed out the world and its characters to such a successful degree where every location had someone or a story that I remembered and cared about. The story was very well paced and jam-packed. Had a few hiccups here and there with the mid-quests, but overall it slowly unraveled the story of these characters in the world in a very effective manner while delivering a very human tale, juxtaposed with beautifully Final Fantasy-esque epic encounters with the icon fights. Was able to shift from different perspectives to change up the style of gameplay, amazing heroes, amazing villains, a great world, a soundtrack that should be soundtrack of the year. And we get to the ending, and I beat the game on stream last night, and I decided instead of going off the cuff, I would sleep on it, mainly because my voice was a bit shot. The ending sucked. I am trying to think of endings that have disappointed me more in video games than 16's. Sure, video games have been filled to the brim with bad endings. And I haven't played every game, but of the ones that I have, very few, if any game, has nailed nearly every component of its formula to such a high, effective degree like Final Fantasy 16, to absolutely drop the ball with its ending. And for me, some people may say it's about the journey, not the destination, but for this type of game, and even more generally, I always disagree with that statement. I understand the sentiment behind it, however, if the ending fails and if you mess up the conclusion to the story, the player and I am left without a sense of closure, without a sense of finality, as if all the work and effort we had just put in was for a fruitless endeavor. And that can be told in an effective manner, but not in 16. And this isn't a video or a take where it's just like, oh, they didn't get a happy, true ending where Clive and Jill went off into the sunset. I don't care, because even if they were going to go the sad route or the happy route, they failed on both counts. Because my problem with the ending is not the tone of which it takes, but the fact that it feels so vague, so inconclusive, as if it tries and desperately leave the final interpretation up to the player, so the player has to write their own dang ending, because the game sure as hell didn't. That may sound hyperbolic, but that is how I feel. I was fine with killing off Dion. I was fine with killing off Joshua, even in kind of the manner that they did it. There was a clear theme between WMDs and the dominance, and the message of the game was that the world had to move on from magic, which was oil, and WMDs as the dominance. Had to move on. I expected the dominance to die. And if you paid attention to the themes of the game, that would have been made very apparent from the opening. So not only was the ending vague, but what it actually accomplishes was formulaic and predictable, without a real sense of payoff. Because the game tries and leaves the ending of these characters up to your interpretation. I did every side quest in the game. My map was clear. I got the max renown, I just didn't do all the hunts. Do you have any idea how unsatisfying this ending would be for the world as a whole and all those characters? Had I not done the side quests, because that's where all their stories pretty much concluded, including some main characters like Byron, like Jill. Most of the cast would not have a finale, or a conclusion, whether it's good or bad, sad or glad. There's just nothing, because the ending is, you beat Ultima in an amazing fight, my favorite fight mechanically of the entire game. What a great final boss to leave it off on. And Ultima dies, humanity can move on. And then they do the thing that so many games and so many stories do that feels super derivative, uneventful, and unrewarding, to serve as nothing more than a cheap ploy to get an emotional reaction out of the player. After the final boss is defeated, the main character must sacrifice themselves for no freaking reason, going against everything the game has set up at that point to set the world aright. And Clive must take upon Ultima's power, despite being the perfect vessel, which was his goal from the freaking start, as Ultima, by the way. Clive must take his power to annihilate the last remaining Mother Crystal, and to remove magic from the equation from Valistia once and for all. And they use that as an excuse to try and keep a vague ending to Clive's fate, because there are people and there are theories for both the idea that Clive died due to petrification on the beach, where he washes up, or that he was able to live on because the red star fades and the sunrise greets Jill, which, based on previous dialogue, couldn't imply that a wish was granted by the god, or that Clive was able to make it out alive, because they never showed him die. They never did. You can interpret it that he died, but there's no conclusive evidence that he lived or died. It's left up to the interpretation of the player, because all the player sees, and all the playoff of Clive's story is that he washes up on a beach, he looks up at the moon, same as Jill, we see Jill cry, Torgal call out, roll credits. And then we get a post-credit scene, which serves to follow up on the world itself. It's a world-based story ending, where at some undisclosed point in the future, we see some family with kids who look eerily similar to Clive and Joshua, basically LARPing the events of 16, and we see a book written by Joshua Rosfield. And that book itself could imply that maybe Joshua lived. Maybe what Clive did at the very end by healing his wound managed to make it so that Josh could live. You could say, but what about the fall though? I mean, Clive survived it. He was still alive on the beachhead. If Clive died, it was to the petrification, not to the fall. Or maybe Clive lived and used Joshua's name as a pen name, because Clive was essentially the narrator for the game as well. It's a vague, unconclusive, indecisive ending, where the only resolution I feel is for the world itself, but not for any of the characters, because the side quest had to do that for me. Which is fine for some characters like Quentin, or the Vale, or Byron and whatever, but for the main characters, you get nothing. You just left off not feeling satisfied, not getting a conclusive answer to anything. And for me, this ending does two things that are antithetical to what I look for in a video game ending. One, it does a vague ending. I can't stand vague endings. They always, like 95% of the time, just leave me with a bad taste in my mouth, without a sense of finality or closure to anything that has transpired in the game. It makes the journey feel less valuable. I have no incentive to play New Game Plus now, because I know the ending is garbage, and it's not going to go anywhere for these characters. I don't know what happened to Clive. No one does, because they could write it. If they ever want to do a follow-up for whatever reason, they could write it in either way, that he lived or died. It makes no difference, because the events of the game don't tell you. Figure it out for yourself. The entire game explained in agonizing detail, in ACT, in effective manners, pretty much every detail of the game. But they don't want to do that for the final, for the main characters. The guy we invested hours in left off on a vague ending because, and even if he had to die, sacrifice himself for the dumbest reason possible. Despite being Ultima's perfect vessel, he somehow can't control the power, if we're led to believe, or that the petrification is starting to take hold, and it goes against the themes of the game as well. Just like for a second, right? Imagine the theme of the ending is supposed to be, now without WMDs, without dominance, humanity can move on. Okay, cool. That's an interesting way to leave off your game world. And in order to do so probably in an effective manner, you want to kill off the dominance as well to symbolize this effect, which means Clive, Josh, and Dion die. Okay, cool. Jill's still there. Oh, but she's not a dominant anymore. Why? When Clive absorbed the powers of each icon from everyone else, those people were still able to transform. We have 2 examples of this. No, not even. We have multiple examples of this. And it was hammered home throughout the game that when Clive absorbed your icon powers, sure, you may not be able to fight effectively as you would before without going to an icon form, but you can still summon the icon. But for some reason, Jill's the exception. So if the goal of the ending theme is that humanity has to move on from WMDs, it's one, poorly explained, contrived, and Jill's still around. So it undermines that purpose. Now, what if the ending theme is that, okay, Clive was able to rid the world of magic and we're able to, as a direct result, remove the icons from the pictures, but the dominants can still live and learn to live without that source of power. Okay, that could be an effective and interesting way. Let's see how that's followed up. He washes up on a beach, and we see his arm get petrified. They never even show him die. If you're going to kill Clive, show him dead. You showed everyone else die. Why not Clive? Why do you leave it vague like that? Because it could be that he just loses his arm, but was able to eventually, after waking up, live. What happens to Jill? What happens to Torgal? I'm assuming Torgal stays around with Jill, but we never see those characters actually move on from the themes of the game, from being dominants, from having that weight and pressure on their shoulders for their entire life. Either show that they die or show that they move on. Not this half and half BS where you kind of leave it up to the player's interpretation. Because to me, that is super unsatisfying and undermines the entire point of the game. And it's shocking because I know they can write good endings. I've played Final Fantasy XIV. I've played those expansions. Heavensward, Shadowbringers, Endwalker, 5.3. I know they can write dang good endings. And like I said, the ending to 16 doesn't even have to be a happy one. I wasn't expecting 16's ending to be happy. I was expecting bittersweet at the most. But what we ended up getting was essentially the ending of Final Fantasy XV without the one bit where we see Noctis and Lunafreya on the throne in the afterlife. Because seriously, when you think about it, I saw this take on Reddit and I agree with it. The ending of 16 is just 15's again. So it's unoriginal on top of everything that I said. And for a game that did everything pretty much so well, executed on so many different ideas to such an effective manner, was willing to try to take risks to move this franchise forward into a new direction. Right before it went in for the touchdown, it fumbled. At least in my opinion. Like, it's not the worst ending they could have written for this, but it's nothing special. And that is one of its greatest sins. It's just forgettable. And it makes the story suffer as a direct result, in my opinion. You may disagree, and that is fine. But for me, it compromises the experience. Undermines any desire that I had to do a New Game Plus playthrough. Because I don't want to experience the story again. Why would I? I know the ending's bad. I know it's unfulfilling, inconclusive, indecisive. Doesn't properly land on any of the themes that it was trying to go for. Outside of the world itself is able to move on. Which is like, okay, yeah, that's like the most predictable end for the world ever for this game. Like, I played the demo and assumed that was gonna happen. Like, maybe they follow it up eventually with DLC, but an ending for a game shouldn't need the DLC to be good. It's like the opposite of the problem from Final Fantasy XV, where 15 had significant issues with the journey, but the destination and the finale was pretty dang freaking good, because it played on its themes, it played on its strengths. Still had a sense of vagueness to it, but it gave us a definitive end for the main characters at least. This is the opposite problem, where everything is so strong and satisfying, but then it just flounders at the end. I'm wholly disappointed with the ending of Final Fantasy XVI. I'm gonna make a full review of the game because there's so many different avenues and aspects to it that I want to talk about because there's so much greatness about it. But the ending severely compromises my experience. It really does. Maybe I don't even think I'll soften on it. I would have just wanted a more definitive ending. Show the characters dying. Do it in an effective way that's cool, that adds to the themes. Or let them go on. Give us that scene with Clive and Jill going on a boat to the new world or the new continent across the ocean. Or have us watch both of them die as they give themselves so that the world itself can move on. Not this half and half BS. Where it's like one foot inside the door and one out. Because they don't want to definitively end the story. At least for these characters. I don't even know what the DLC would be if they want to do DLC for this game. Like, maybe you follow Josh in his journey before he met up with Clive again. Like, maybe. Can you even do a follow-up? You would have to change the gameplay significantly. Because there's no magic left in the world. Unless you want to do, oh, there's like few little strands of magic left, but it's evaporating over time. Like, maybe you do that, but I don't know, man. I just don't know. I'm gonna call the video there for today, though. It sucks, but hey, what are you gonna do? We move on to the next game, right? Think I got it all off my chest, so I'm gonna call it there for today. I hope my ramblings made some kind of coherent sense. And if you agree or disagree, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your perspectives, hear your theories about what happened or how you headcanon the ending because they didn't want to give us an actual freaking ending for these characters. I digress, though. I promise you I'll stop right there. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and it helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe out there, but have a great day. Go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again.